the APA, the Afghan Placement Assistance Program. We resettled 76 Afghans through that. And then we did well with that resettlement. So then we were asked, do you want to be an official refugee resettlement agency? And we said, yes. We started becoming known as the Yes Agency. So now we are one of 3 refugee resettlement agencies in the state of Connecticut. It would be JFS of Greenwich, along with Siri and Iris. And we are currently serving about a little over 500 a year. And so we have multiple programs. When I came on board, we had about 5 people. It was like 2 programs. Now we have over 7 programs, including U for You, which is Uniting for Ukraine. We have RNP, which is resettlement and placement for refugees specifically, and I guess we'll go into that more. APA is still running, and we also have a separate legal department that provides pro bono services to anyone that requires immigration assistance that resides within Fairfield County. So I supervise those 7 programs and a lot of people and all of the clients that come into our care. Yeah.
Wonderful. Lisa? Yeah.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. My name is Lisa Sandstrom, and I am the Program Manager for Literacy Volunteers at Family Centers. Literacy Volunteers specifically works with adult learners, adult ESL learners, English language learners, ELLs. There's lots of different little acronyms for that. But essentially, we serve adult learners living in Lower Fairfield County, helping them learn and improve English. We also help with workforce readiness skills, career development, helping them find jobs. We have some federal funding that helps eligible people who are able to work in the U.S. with professional certifications and training, all leading towards independence and self-sufficiency. Really, really important. Overall, the agency of Family Centers is about over 135 years old, and there's 28 programs at Family Centers, focusing on education and healthcare, really working towards that independence and self-sufficiency piece that is so necessary for our new arrivals and our neighbors in the community. We have programs that work not only with language development and career development, job placement, but we have programs for families, parents as co-educators, parents as educators, early learning programs for children like Head Start. We have a federally qualified health center providing health care for folks without insurance. We worked very closely with the Afghani new arrivals with JFS when those folks arrived in February 2021. Not only were we teaching them English, but they were attending our health center for their vaccines as they entered the country. So on this stage is lots of collaboration. We work really closely together supporting these people, and I'm happy to be with our community partners. In addition to the healthcare center, we have Stanford has, I think, 3 of the schools. We have healthcare centers in the schools for the children of many of the folks that maybe don't have options to healthcare outside. We can talk a little bit more about what we do, but essentially embracing the family, which is why we're called Family Centers. And with those 28 programs, there's lots of cross-agency collaboration, supporting a continuing of care to the person that we're seeing. It might be a single person, it could be their whole family. But we're committed to really building that self-sufficiency piece and promoting independence. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. Don, please
Thanks,
tell
Ellen.
us a little bit about you.
Sure, and thanks to the library for this very timely event and the excellent programs that you provide for immigrants. I'm Deputy Director of Building One Community. We were founded 12 years ago, almost exactly, to provide immigrants in Stamford and neighboring towns the tools that they need to become successful members of the community. We've had to grow fast because 1 in 3 people in Stamford actually was born in another country, so there's a lot of demand for our services. We teach language and job skills. We provide legal immigration services, and we help immigrants get services like health care and better education for their children. Actually, a lot of new arrivals come to Building One Community, and we help bridge the gap to programs that they may not understand very well, or where there can be language barriers. Just today, we had a community health day where folks could come and get health screenings. Particularly excited about vision care with an optometrist, and people getting free glasses, dental cleanings, even haircuts. So a variety of services. Since we were founded, we've served more than 13,000 immigrants who speak 43 different languages and come from 112 countries. We now have offices on both the east and west side of Stamford, and I should say that more than half of our staff, including our executive director, are immigrants themselves. I guess two last things I'll say. One is we're very passionate about volunteer involvement. To date this year, more than 450 volunteers have been involved at Building One Community, and each one of them really, really makes a difference in immigrants' lives. And also partnerships, like Lisa said. When we started 12 years ago, there was one of us, Catalina Horak, the executive director. And we consisted mostly of partnerships, organizations with expertise that we could provide a bridge to so that immigrants could more effectively access their services. And that continues today. All of the organizations represented here. New Haven is a little far, but we actually look forward to partnering with you guys, hopefully on one of the issues that I'd like to highlight tonight.
For sure, that would be great. I'm so glad you brought up the importance of volunteers, because after we have a bit more of our conversation tonight, I would love to maybe just round out and end our conversation talking about a call to action or, volunteer needs at your organization, because working at a nonprofit, I know how critical volunteers are. So I appreciate that. Before we kind of dive into some of the details of everyone's work, I thought, we hear terms like refugee, asylee or asylum seeker. I think people are hearing now about people being paroled, so they're parolees in the country. I thought we might just start a little bit with definitions so we know who we're talking about when we say these terms, and maybe just a little bit about services that your programs might offer to address, each of the different type of new arrival in the U.S. Yeah. Would you like to start, Melanie, or
Sure.
whoever would like to take
Sure.
that?
So I think people commonly use the terms interchangeably when they're really not. They're actually quite different legal definitions. So from a legal standpoint, a refugee, it's someone escaping war, persecution, natural disaster, and typically, and the way that our agency receives refugees is it's very, very specific. Someone registers with UNHCR, which is the UN Refugee Agency. You are outside of the country, and you were a person to say, I am trying to escape war, persecution, natural disaster. I am registering at UNHCR outside of the country. From there, you would go to a refugee camp in a secondary country. So, for example, if you are an Afghan and you register at UNHCR and say, I am seeking refugee status, typically you would go to a refugee camp in Qatar. If you are a Syrian seeking refugee status, typically you would go to a refugee camp in Istanbul, Turkey. Unless you're in the Triangle countries in South America, in which case you would go to a refugee camp in your own country. You're put on a list, and very much like the organ donor list, you're clocked into the second. And so from the second that you register at UNHCR, they have a date stamp of the date and time that you entered the list, as well as your family makeup, your medical conditions in the family, the status of your medical, and if you have a U.S. tie. So do you know anyone in the United States? Then it would go to PRM, which is Bureau of Population, Migrants, and Refugees. And PRM has 10 affiliates, commonly referred to as the 10, that review the cases. It turns up almost like on an Excel spreadsheet. there's a table and all the affiliates sit around that table and they say, we'll take case number 178 and resettle them. We'll take case number 295. We'll take case 1072. And there's all this math that goes into how and where people are resettled. HIAS is one of the 10 resettlement agencies in the United States under PRM, which is our federal government's bureau. JFS of Greenwich is a HIAS affiliate. So HIAS then has 27 U.S. affiliates as of 2023. That number is always changing and growing as new affiliates are properly registered and pop up. And then HIAS designates, it looks like this person has a U.S. tie in Connecticut, or Connecticut, will you assure this case? I review the case, I say, yes, we'll take that family. That family has 2 people, 4 people, 9 people, however many are in the makeup of that family. We take them, they're in our pipeline, and then we get travel notification of their coming in. From that point, we assign a case manager, we secure them housing, we enroll the kids in school, we enroll them in ESL classes, we provide them resumes, job placement plans, we help secure employment, we register for their ORR benefits. And as a refugee, your passport stamp says REF. You're a refugee, meaning from the date that you enter the United States, 1 year later, you automatically qualify for a green card, legal permanent resident status, and 5 years after that point, you can qualify to fill out what's called the N-400 application, which is the application to naturalize to become a U.S. citizen. At that point, you'd go, you would take the English and civics test, you'd fill out the paperwork, and you can take the oath of naturalization. If you pass and you receive a certificate of naturalization and a passport, you are a U.S. citizen. So for refugees, you're automatically on a pathway to citizenship. You arrive with legal status, you registered at UNHCR when you were out of the country. It's a very long process. It's not something that happens overnight. And it's definitely a journey. And anyone that has been on that journey will tell you it took a long time, from registering to the refugee camp, to getting approved, to coming in, to being resettled, to waiting the year to become a legal permanent resident. For humanitarian parolees, so a lot of, it's very popular in the news these days, what happened in Afghanistan and what happened in Ukraine. There are 2 programs. There's the APA program, which many of our agencies work with, which is the Afghan Placement Assistance Program. So when Biden withdrew troops in September of 2021, we left a lot of people behind that urgently and immediately needed to get out. They are not refugees. They're humanitarian parolees. If you were to look at their passport, if they had a passport, it would say HP, meaning humanitarian parole. What does that mean? That means that you were granted a temporary status in the United States for 1 or 2 years, and you can go and look up people's I-94. That would be their travel document of how they got here. And as a humanitarian parolee, it's a temporary status. It doesn't put you on a pathway to citizenship. It doesn't put you on a pathway to a green card or legal permanent resident status. You have to take an additional action somehow to adjust status. So you legally entered, you're legally here, but now how are we going to take that additional step? So for our Afghans, it was typically that they're applying for asylum. So they're asylum seekers. They entered on humanitarian parole, they're humanitarian parolees. They're eligible for ORR benefits, meaning Husky for health insurance, SNAP for food, cash assistance for the temporary period of time that they received. They did do an automatic extension. I think they originally gave them 2 years. They are automatically extending them for an additional 2 years. So in that time for our 76, I filed 76 asylum applications for those people. I went on their interviews at USCIS, which is United States Immigration and Customs or Citizenship Services. So I went on those interviews, and about half of them have been granted asylum so far. So now that they've been granted asylum, I've filled out the I-485 application for them. It's to adjust status to become a legal permanent resident. But it's a path, and it's long, and it's not automatic. There are additional steps that need to be taken and granted to get that status. And similar for our Ukrainians under U for U, when it first broke out in April of 2022, they either came in with DT status, they were paroled in, or UHP. And their passport and their I-94 says UHP. It stands for Ukrainian Humanitarian Parole. Those people in the very beginning were granted 1 year. Then a couple weeks into the war, they said, the situation's not going to get better. 1 year is probably not going to cut it. We need to give these people 2 years. So that would extend them to about May of 2024, so May of next year. So as of March 13th, the Department of Homeland Security, myself, along in partnership with a number of organizations, pushed DHS to extend the people that were given 1 year. We said, their status is about to expire. What do you expect them to do? They're about to go out of status. If they're out of status, then they don't have legal status to be here. They'll lose ORR benefits. They can't go home. Some of their houses don't exist anymore. What do you expect them to do? You can't send them back to a war zone, and you can't leave them here without any protection. So we pushed the people that had 1 year. They automatically extended and got a second year. So now they're in the same 2 year timetable for spring, summer 2024 as everybody else. Hopefully they'll give them another extension, or hopefully those people will have another way to adjust because they can't go home. So at that point, our legal department is constantly reviewing their cases to say, what do we do? Are we filing for asylum for them? Do they have a U.S. citizen family member that potentially could petition for them in some way, or that they can adjust? So then they have to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis, because humanitarian parolees, it's a temporary protected period of time. Asylees, legally, it's people that are filling out or asylum seekers. You're filling out an I-589 application. It's the application for asylum, withholding of removal, and CAT, which stands for Convention Against Torture. That means that you are a member of a protected class that is persecuted because of your protected class by your government or by an organization that your government is unwilling or unable to protect you from. And then if you're found to have suffered past persecution because of your protected class, you then have the benefit of the assumption that you'll have future persecution. If you suffered persecution in the past, well, then you get this benefit that you will continue to be persecuted in the future. And then the burden shifts to the government to prove that if they say, oh, there's either been a fundamental change in circumstance, meaning, all right, so the government might have persecuted you because of your protected class, but now the government's different. It's a different political party, it's a different regime. Something has fundamentally changed that you wouldn't be persecuted. Maybe you were persecuted then by that government, but it's a different government now, and you would no longer be persecuted by the current government. Or can you safely relocate within your country? If you're in a country like Ecuador, it's tiny. You can drive from one end to the other end of the country in a day. If you're so you can't safely relocate anywhere there, in theory. But if you're in a country like India or a larger country, maybe you aren't safe in your state or province, but perhaps you can move to a different state or province in your country, and you would be safe there. And then there's good moral character requirements and travel requirements, and asylum is like a very, very complicated, complex process. So for anyone seeking asylum, I highly recommend that they contact one of our agencies and sit and speak with one of our specially trained immigration attorneys. But it's also a very long process. People don't get asylum overnight. There are some people that applied for asylum and they're 10, 15 years in waiting for it. And it depends if they were in removal proceedings or if they were affirmatively applying for it. So, yeah, I could go on about this for about 7 hours, but I will let someone else speak.
Write a book.
I will.
Yes, no, I hear you. I think it was so helpful to hear as you were explaining, all of the different complicated requirements that have to be proven to show that you are deserving of asylum, as opposed to individuals who register with the UNHCR abroad and get refugee status. Obviously, neither process is simple. But in terms of navigating this process, is there enough representation out there for people who are trying to figure this out without a legal education, without knowing our country's system, without knowing how to speak English?
Yeah.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you, Alan. So we created our removal defense program in 2021. Removal, deportation mean basically the same thing. Because of a concern about the really large number of people in especially Fairfield County, but all of Connecticut, who are in removal proceedings. And we're very pleased with the program that we've been building, but it's nowhere near the size that's needed to grapple with this problem. And the numbers are somewhat shocking. In Connecticut, 30,000 people are in deportation proceedings, and the number in Fairfield County is 16,000. In the last 90 days alone, 3,000 people were put in additional people were put in proceedings. Now, a certain number of those people are doubtless eligible for asylum. Now, what do we mean by asylum? Excellent overview, and I'll just repeat a little bit. Asylum is something that countries have promised to each other and to themselves starting in the early 1950s, following the lessons of World War II, that no country will force someone who is fleeing persecution back into the country where they were being persecuted. And there are certain legal requirements. It needs to be certain, that fall within certain definitions: race, religion, nationality, particular social group, political opinion. But the basic is that no country will force someone who has fled back into persecution. So of the 30,000 people in Connecticut who are in removal proceedings, some of them, not all of them for sure, but some of them should be eligible for asylum because they are fleeing conditions in their home countries. You just look at Central America, the Northern Triangle countries of El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala has been likened. Those countries have been likened to a war zone, and there are specific kinds of persecution that are happening. So some of the 30,000 should be eligible for asylum, but of the 30,000, 3 out of 4 don't have attorneys. And your point that it's very technical and complicated is a very good one. And your point that if you don't speak the language and you don't understand the legal processes, you can't advance your claim. So our concern as we take on more removal clients is that for every one that we can take on, there are many, many that we don't have the capacity to do. So what do you do about that? How do you make asylum something that's actually real and not just words on a piece of paper for these folks, and allow them to stay and build lives as the law says they should be able to? Well, there are about 50 jurisdictions around the United States that have created programs to publicly fund defense of people who are charged with in deportation proceedings, including right next door to us, New York City has one of the most advanced programs where our number is about 25% of people in removal proceedings have a lawyer. In New York, it's about 56% because they have strong public funding. And, about 49 other jurisdictions are doing something similar. Rhode Island itself has a much higher percentage of people who are represented. So this really is one of our primary concerns. Asylum, refugee status, these are things that nations agreed to, but the agreement itself isn't enough and the laws themselves aren't enough. In the United States, if you're charged with shoplifting and are charged criminally, you're entitled to a lawyer, to a publicly funded lawyer, but not so for somebody who may be sent back to a country where they were being persecuted and would be very much in danger if they went back.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was about to say, yeah, if someone is in jeopardy of one day of incarceration in this country, that's enough for our laws to say that person deserves a defense. But the consequences for these individuals seeking asylum are so much more severe, and yet oftentimes they are left to try to navigate that process on their own, and it's very unfortunate.
I'll also point out the application for asylum is 12 pages. It is only in English on the site. You can only file the application in English, and that's not including the evidence that you would have to compile and submit with the application. And I see some of our volunteers in the audience that I know have filed many for me and that I've trained to file them. It's USCIS, it's not a very easy website to navigate. It's not particularly user-friendly. So if any of you have ever personally filed your very complicated taxes, imagine if you didn't speak English. I would argue that it's like 5 times more complicated than filing your taxes, and significantly more extensive because of the volume of the application.
Yeah. Well, this has really given us a helpful overview of, individuals who come here and they're seeking paths that give them permanent status in the United States, or it puts them on a path towards permanent status in the United States, like refugees, people seeking asylum. But Melanie, you also spoke a little bit about people who have been given very temporary options at the moment. Can you just talk a little bit about whether there's anything in the works for those people with temporary options from Ukraine and Afghanistan who clearly are not returning to their home countries anytime soon, unfortunately, to have more permanence and more stability in the United States?
So there's a lot of different organizations, including ours, that are advocating for action from Department of Homeland Security, action from USCIS to provide more permanent pathways. And most of our clients, and I guess specifically I can refer to our U4U program, but it would refer to any humanitarian parolee with a temporary period of time. But they're people that woke up to bombs one day. They were people with beautiful lives. I've met with every single one of our clients, and most of them are very similar to me. And it breaks my heart because there are women that said, I did everything right. I met my husband, I started my family, we had good jobs, we built this beautiful home, and we had these young children. We were a young family living our life. And one day we woke up, and there were bombs going off in the streets, and our country is at war, and I'm diving into my child's bed to scoop them up and carry my 3 or 4-year-old child to the Poland border. My husband, as males between the ages of 18 and 65 are not allowed out of the country. I then had to flee with my small children on my own. And here I am in the United States, in a country that I don't speak the language. I don't have my family support. I don't have my husband, who's my partner, that I, fell asleep with every night and woke up with every morning. I had to leave my job behind, and now I'm in essence a single mother of 2 small children, and I don't know if my status will get extended. I now have, so we're sitting in June of 2023. So what happens to me? I came here, let's say last June. for 2 years. I have 1 year left. Then what? What happens to me? What will my life look like? My kids are now enrolled in school. We're going to ESL classes. You helped me secure employment to support my children here because I'm here alone and I have to. It's a life that they never envisioned or planned. And the benefits, like ORR state benefits, are set up to help these people for a reason. But they said, my home doesn't exist anymore. It was bombed to the ground. My husband is now, off fighting. He's not allowed out. What happens to me? So these agencies are putting forward to say they can't go home. There's nowhere to go home to. And they're now adjusting to life here. Some of these people have been here about a year. And they had a sponsor that filled out an I-131 form to have them legally come in. So we're pushing back to say they don't have permanent status. It's a temporary status, but are you going to give them an extension? Are you going to put them on a pathway that they can have some more permanence? Because the reality is those children adapt faster. They're already integrated in the communities. They're already playing with our children. They're growing up here. They're enrolled in school. This is their life. So at what point are they either going to be yanked back or put in removal proceedings? And then to have to go battle it out in court. And once they're placed in removal proceedings, they lose ORR benefits. There's not enough legal representation to help them navigate. What does become of these people? That's the crisis. So we're all advocating that they need a pathway, and hopefully there is some call to action, and hopefully the government does do something.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned, I think, briefly in there, that I think just comes up a lot in these conversations is employment for people who are here, whether they're here on a temporary status or on a path to more permanent status. What is that situation like? Is everyone able to apply for authorization to work? Does everyone get that just as part of their status? Can you talk a little bit about, how people navigate authorization to work, and then maybe a little bit more about how you guys are helping people to find that work?
Yeah, well, there's certainly avenues for employment authorization, whether you are a refugee or you're applying for asylum, and there are different sort of time periods, waiting periods, that kind of thing. I do think that the employment issue is really key, and the language issue, which Family Centers works on, comes almost before the employment training. And our partnership with Family Centers is really a strong one that's very valuable to B1C. I'd love to let Lisa talk, a little bit about their Literacy Volunteers program.
Yeah. Thanks, Don. I think it's so interesting to hear. Thank you. That you're just like amazing encyclopedia of information. I think what's important to remember as we think about these terms and these numbers and these applications and these pathways to their process is that we're talking about human beings. We're talking about our neighbors, and in our program this year we're serving. We just finished our school year with the exception of some summer programs. We served 560 people. But by February, when we no longer could enroll anyone, we had 154 people on our wait list for September. Some of those people we'll put into classes in the summer for people with volunteers that are available to teach, or we recommend that they come to Let's Talk here at the library. But this whole legal process is just one part of what they're going through when they come to this country. There's a whole every day, going to the grocery store, going to the post office, going to the doctor, going to bring your child to school. All of those things that for Americans who speak English, who were born here, we take that for granted. And that those everyday tasks are monumental and exhausting for them. and so, so scary. And I think when we think about our neighbors and our friends who are in these situations, we have to remember that the struggle is real for them, that they feel misplaced, they feel misunderstood, they don't feel like they belong. And yet there is this urgency of helping them find work and helping them learn the language and pushing this forward. And there's an adrenaline rush in that, right? It's like, okay, we're doing all of this and there's a lot of support. And then the dust settles a little bit. Like just recently, last Saturday, we'll go back further. Last Thursday, I sat in on a graduating class, little celebration on Zoom. And the women in that class happened to all be from Ukraine. And they were so happy and so proud of their graduating in this workforce readiness program. And on Saturday, I found out that one of them's brother was killed in Ukraine in the dam and the whole situation with the dams. And so they come here and everything is so, there's a path and there's hope and there's a plan. But then back home, they're dealing with the reality of what's still happening, but there's nothing they can do from here. And so at Family Centers, I will be reaching out to her to talk about grieving services at the Center for Hope. We'll be talking about mental health counseling for her, because they're still happening. Their families are still there if they weren't able to come here. One of the person on my staff, her parents are still in Kiev. So I think when we think about Family Centers, when they come to us to register, their immigration status actually doesn't matter to us. It doesn't matter. They come just as they are. We meet them exactly where they are. In many cases, they come to learn about work, and they're working in very menial jobs, day-to-day, things that everyone needs, and they're making money, but maybe they were a physician in their native country, or they were a veterinarian, or a dentist. And then here, they're doing something that is, putting food on their table, but is very much beneath their education and their experience. And I think there's so much value in that, and we have so much to learn from them with that. And one of my staff, actually, who's here from Chile, she recently said, as she was stumbling trying to get the words out, and she's just brilliant, but she said, "I wish you knew how smart I was in Spanish." And I never had anyone say anything to me that resonated in such a deep way, because she's right. And when I hear her speak in her native language, I know she's brilliant, but there it is, so quick, so quick, so quick. And she struggles to have those conversations. And there's a lot of bias and a lot of misconceptions about when people speak, and when they sound like they have an accent. But they are our neighbors, and they need your support. And here is just one component of what they're dealing with, these forms and these legal pieces and all of it. But for them to go to the grocery store is so scary. So the language piece, to me, of course, this is what I do, this is what I'm passionate about, is the foundation, that common thread. If we cannot communicate, we're stuck. And many of my volunteers, so we have a volunteer program that teaches English. We train them how to teach English. I have a couple of tutors here this evening, which is wonderful, and the same with Yelena doing the same. And people get frustrated with attendance, right? They get frustrated and they say to us, this person didn't show up, and this person didn't show up, and this person didn't show up. Well, we're texting them. Oh, you have class tonight. We're looking forward to seeing you. They hear from us every single week before every single class. This year we sent over 95,000 texts to our 550 students. Sometimes we don't know, did life just get in the way and they're just bogged down and they can't? In some cases we find out they're deported, but we wouldn't necessarily know that. And that's not something that's concerning to us. We want to just take them and help them with those secondary pieces, right? Those life pieces, those survival pieces that are so important. And at Family Centers, whether it's the Center for Hope, for grieving, to help this young woman with her brother that just passed away in Ukraine, to give her some tools to help her deal with that is so, so important. And for ongoing mental health. We're in a mental health crisis in the world, in the whole world, thanks to COVID and many other things like war in Ukraine and everything. And so at Family Centers, we can provide that to them. But we don't often see that when they first come. It's later. it's later. So that safety net. So we rely on JFS and B1C and other agencies to help with that legal stuff. And then in our community partnerships, that's where we come in. That's where we say, okay, we can do the healthcare, and we can do the language, and we can do the grieving, therapy and mental health, because it is a village. We've heard that before, and it truly is a village in this experience. But the language piece is so essential, and especially for work, because that is building them towards self-sufficiency. That is building them towards that independence piece that is so essential. And we rely on B1C to help some of our people that aren't eligible to work in the U.S. There are people that have just gone past the legal regulations, and they're here. We don't ask those questions when they come to our program. What is their capacity? What can they do? Are they eligible to work in the U.S.? Are they at the right level of English that we can put them into a certification and a training program? Because we'll pay for that. There's jobs in healthcare at an entry level that we will pay for training and get them there. But we need to get their English there first. And that's where it's so important that those just essential skills of it's not about grammar, it's not about punctuation, it's just that comfort, right? And they know that they're different. So what's so important is to create a safe, trusting environment, a community. I'm always just saying community, is having that community of support, having that network, having that safety net to then push them forward is so essential. And I think that's where these partnerships, and we're able to speak about that, and Yelena bringing us together. And Yelena is one of those community partners too. The library is essential to provide those spaces where we can give the support that people need. And it's different for every single person. Everyone comes here with a level of English. When we partnered with JFS in February of 2022, we brought in 17 Afghans into our program. Women with zero English, women with zero native language. They did not know how.
Yeah, not just zero English, but illiterate in their own language.
Literate in their own language.
So it's hard to teach English not only to someone that doesn't speak English, but to someone that doesn't know how to read or write in their native language, in Dari or Pashto.
Right. And Google Translate does not have Dari or Pashto.
They have Persian.
Yeah.
It's about 70% effective. Again, if you speak,
Right.
if you're fluent in your own language, but even then it's not a perfect. So, and just to clarify, so for the work authorization part, if you are a refugee, again, the terms are not interchangeable. I know everyone wants to just refer to it as, if you are actually a refugee, meaning you registered at UNHCR, you came in, your I-94 says REF, you're actually a refugee, you are work eligible from the second that you step foot on U.S. soil, immediately. Even before what's called your EAD, it's your employment authorization document. It's a card that they carry around, kind of like a driver's license. Before that even comes in, you are immediately work eligible. You can start working that same day. Your flight lands at 7, you could go to work at 8, as long as you cleared customs. And the same thing is if you enter as a refugee under SIV status, it stands for Special Immigrant Visa. Again, immediately eligible. And if you're actually SIV, we're just waiting for your green card to arrive in the mail. If you enter as a refugee, we're waiting for your EAD, your work authorization, to arrive to our office in the mail. For the humanitarian parolees, so the Afghans or the Ukrainians, when they first came in, it was not the law that they were immediately eligible. There was an additional step. It's called the I-765 application for the work permit that needed to be filled out and filed. They have since changed that. So in the fall of last year, I think it was November or December, they changed it to say, yeah, all right, that's unfair. Because we all said, they got here and now you're asking them to fill out applications and pay $410 filing fees and then wait 8 to 10 weeks for processing to be eligible to work. How do you expect them to survive? You expect them to come in and then wait 10 weeks where you're telling them they can't legally work? And if they do legally work, or if they do work without legal authorization, then they're going to be penalized for that. So we all were like, that's ridiculous. And the government was like, all right, fine, we agree with you. It's ridiculous. They're immediately authorized. Fill out the application on the back end. It's fine. So at that point, then they were, the Ukrainians especially, legally authorized. And we filled out those applications. They waived the fee. Many of the 10 reimbursed those 410 applications. We said, here are all the people that paid $410, which to some of us might not sound like a lot. But to these people, $410 for a filing fee when you just entered and you're not legally authorized to work, that's a ton. Where are they supposed to get that? So for the people that paid it, we said, give us your names, give us the receipt, the proof that you paid, and we'll reimburse you for that. Because some of them, that's half their rent. That's the ability to feed their children for a month. It's the little things like that. So that's kind of the differences in the work authorization. And then if they had their EAD, it's valid for the period of time that they're authorized to be here. So if they have 2 years of authorization in the United States, then their work permit would be valid for 2 years. As we get close to the end of that, then they would have to do the 765 again to renew their work authorization, saying either my status was extended or I filed this other application that still hasn't been adjudicated yet. It's still pending, so it needs to be extended. But my colleagues brought up self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency is what we're all striving for. We're trying to help each and every person that comes through our doors reach self-sufficiency. And that's just the bare minimum. Then we're trying to get them to success and thrive here. But the English is this huge part. And so as our agency, we might take care of their critical, urgent, our title should be like director of triage. It's like trauma-based 90 days. They come in, they have nothing. All right, sign them up with their husky so that they have health care because God forbid they have an accident in the first week here and they have to take the kids to the hospital. Make sure that they have SNAP so that they can go to the store and get food. Make sure their cash, all of their ORR benefits. Do they have safe housing? Does it have running water? Do they have clothing? All of these, are the kids enrolled in school? Do they go to our school impact programs? And luckily, we are not doctors, so we've worked extremely closely with family centers. Every person that comes in, we fill out the family center's intake. They go there for their refugee health assessment. And when family centers completes that, they come back. If they have, and it flags anything. It'll flag a mental health screening for us. It'll flag maybe a TB positive case, which is pretty rare. I think I've seen like 2 in my entire duration, but anything, it's done in a timely manner, and we work very closely. We're on calls with family centers almost every week, at least once a week, and that comes back to us, and the English piece is a huge part, because, like she said, there are clients of ours that have master's degrees. I had a client come in 3 months ago. He's a pediatric urologist in Ukraine. Can't do that here, though. Mom, she has a master's degree in education, but they don't speak English. So as a result, they're working lower level jobs, trying to go through all of our ESL programs to improve their English, to work up to a role that properly reflects their education and experience, because the English part is hindering their success and their ability to work in roles that they deserve to be in.
You mentioned trauma, and I think that's a really important issue to touch on a little bit. Right now, according to the UN Refugee Agency, 103 million people have been forcibly displaced from their countries. The number of people who are emigrating, on the move is much larger. It's actually 1 billion people. But forcibly displaced means potential trauma and in their backgrounds. And trauma is actually a psychological health issue that is much better understood now than it was, say, 20 years ago. And I'm sure that the story, what I'm going to say about Building One Community's approach is mirrored in all of our agencies. But we are often working with people who have suffered trauma, and it affects them in many of their current circumstances. And, particularly a removal case where there's asylum that needs to be asserted in the immigration court. Working with that client on this story that should entitle them to receive asylum means that they have to work through an experience that may trigger very, very painful reactions. And our staffs, I'm sure, need to be trained so that we can do that work effectively, so that we can help them to be able to talk to an immigration judge about what they've gone through, but also so that the staff people themselves who can experience vicarious trauma because they're, in a sense, living through this experience with the client, can do their job without sort of being pulled down and experiencing burnout. So it's an important part of what Building One Community is doing right now is training our staff so that we can be more effective. And it's incredibly important. We've had successful asylum claims that we've litigated with our participants. One, a woman who was a social leader in her country but was targeted because of that, but received asylum because she and we were able to make the effective argument together to the immigration judge. But there are a lot of situations where there's violence in the background. I don't think it's different than 100 years ago. Often there was violence in the background of refugees and people who needed to move then, but certainly it's happening now as well.
The staff trainings are really key. Our entire agency is a trauma-informed service agency, meaning that we provide probably every 2 months there's a sensitivity training. We primarily, before refugee resettlement, we're a behavioral health and services agency. So we have a team of licensed clinical therapists and psychologists providing trauma therapy. So if Family Centers pulls a flag that said, yes, we did the screening with them, it looks like they might benefit from some mental health. They experienced horrific things, not just like the PTSD from the war or bombs or being triggered, but physical violations, whatever was going on in their country. There's just really horrific things. And like Dawn said, it's a lot as a case manager or a staff person to sit in and day out. And these are people, and they're sharing their lives and their stories with you. And it's a lot to not take that on and have it weigh you down. And so whether it's the trainings of how to effectively deal with that or to communicate with the clients with trauma-sensitive language, or to say, periodically you have PTO for a reason. Take a day off, close your laptop, close your phone, don't answer email, take a day off, take a reset button, because it is a lot. And in this field, there is a very high turnover rate because it is a lot to take on. And even with our volunteers, we rely so heavily on our volunteers. There is this call to action and sense of philanthropic duty to get involved to help people because it is a crisis. It's such a demand, and all of our services to help people adapt and navigate their life here. Even with our volunteers, they experience volunteer burnout. And I say to them, most of our programs, there's an initial 90-day resettlement period. So they're in a program for 90 days. After those initial 90 days, they're actually discharged from that program. And then depending on how they're doing, they're enrolled in another program. It's called our Preferred Communities Intensive Case Management. Typically, they have a health problem or their ESL, their English fluency isn't quite there yet, because who could possibly be fluent in a new language in 90 days? I don't know. Or that they're, gainfully employed, the kids are all right. It very rarely happens within 90 days. It's a beautiful goal. It just is unrealistic. So then they get enrolled in a new program that's a 6-month program. So in those first 90 days, I say, if you're a volunteer working with the family, work with them, do 3 months, then take a step back, go on a vacation, take some time away, and then when you're refreshed and ready and you want to work with a new family, we'll assign you a new family to work with.
Yes, I wanted to ask Lisa if you wanted to add anything
Yeah, I just
to
want-
our topic that we've been
Yeah,
discussing.
thank you. I just want to say a quick thing about work. So it's wonderful when someone might have the eligibility to work, and obviously the goal is for them to gain skills and have the training and have the language and earn money for their family. But I think what we talk about, the word acculturation, right? Workplace culture as being one of those things is so different here than it may have been in their native country. And it's like if maybe you've ever worked in corporate and then suddenly you work in nonprofit, very different. Or maybe you worked in a school system and now you're working in a hospital. It's like a whole new language. It's a whole new reality. That's what it's like for them. And so I can give an example of one of our Afghani new arrivals. And one of the caseworkers called me and said, he needs more help with his English. He's going to lose his job. I said, what do you mean he's going to lose his job? He's working, day and night. And she said he couldn't tell that he was working in a deli in Norwalk. And he couldn't tell the difference in language in the menu and on the boxes of the chicken, between like a chicken tender and something else that looked very similar. And so he was messing up the orders, and the customers were getting angry. And then they come back and they complain, and that's costing the owner money. Well, and he's not happy with this guy who can't speak the language, and I'm going to get rid of him, And it becomes very frustrating. So these things, when you get you order a bagel and cream cheese and you get a bagel and lox instead, you don't know what the backstory is on that. And so I think as we go into these stores or restaurants or something like that, and the person is maybe having a difficult time understanding, or they look really tired, it's because they're working multiple jobs. And processing another language and being in a new environment and just trying to assimilate into that environment is exhausting. And so, I think we've all kind of said this during COVID, be patient with each other. Remember that, someone's struggle is their struggle, and be mindful of that. But these are real things, and I think it's so important that they do get the work, but it is very difficult. For them to understand the culture, to understand what's appropriate at work. I have it with two of my staff from very different countries. One, just different expectations of maybe what they had in their experience in their country and how different it is here. And to be patient and understand that was appropriate there, it's not so appropriate here. And I think that's a really big piece.
The cultural orientations of sitting down to say, within the first week, I was going into Stanford Criminal Court begging the prosecutor to drop a case because there was a single mom and she ran into the market. She was in there 11 minutes, but she left her 5- and 7-year-old in the car, which in Ukraine, you do all the time. The kids are in the car. You're not going to take 2 kids out, drag them into the store to buy 2 items, come back out. She gave them an iPhone. The car was locked. The windows were down. Well, that's a misdemeanor in the state of Connecticut. So I, fell on my sword and said, I apologize. They came in on a Thursday. They didn't get the cultural orientation on a Friday. Here we are, it's Monday. We've all left our kid in the car for a minute, and I get that it's legal and there's no defense, but this will never happen again. Every single person that comes in will get a cultural orientation about the laws, about child safety, about car seats, about everything. We've been working with the fire department to ensure that everyone knows how to properly install the car seats for the kids, that no, you can't leave the kids in the car. In the workplace, there are certain things that are and aren't appropriate. And for every story like that, there's salon stories that we have of the language barrier created something. Every service industry, and especially during the pandemic, be kind, be patient, and you don't know the reasoning behind those employees.
Absolutely. I was just gonna say, everyone has made such incredible points, and I know that we have questions here tonight, and I want us to leave time for those questions. So we will turn it over to you all now for whatever questions you'd like to ask our panelists.
Good evening. My name is Mari Carmen Godoy. I am a reporter from La Voz Hispana, the Spanish newspaper. and I'm working la diocese de Bridgeport too in the church. And my question is for the Building One community and from the Literate volunteers. A few months ago, the Monsignor, the Bishop of the diocese, make a statement about the new refugees, and they make a census for la diocese. And they discovered we had 2,500 new arrival families from South America and Central America. When we talk about that, my question is, how do you can working with the churches and try to help to the Latino community? I understand about today is we celebrate the refugees, but in terms the refugees, we don't have Latino countries and refugees. So my question is, how we consider it? For example, behind me, I had a madame, she's from Bolivia. She was executive director in the municipality of the Santa Cruz. And I had another friend, she's a deputy prosecutor in Venezuela. And she's working hard, and she has political asylum in one moment in her life, just 8 months ago. So we had a new arrivals from our community, very successful people, like the doctor said, somebody coming from this pediatric, or your mom is from master degree in teaching. A lot of good people, but unfortunately we are from another countries, and especially from the Latino country. This is my question.
Yeah, it's a great question. When we talk about refugees and think about refugees, often the conversation is about countries where these programs actually exist, right? And there are Latin American countries where the situation is equally difficult. I may have mentioned earlier that Doctors Without Borders, said that the Northern Triangle countries in Central America, there are situations there that are sometimes like a war zone. Civil wars, the civil war in Guatemala lasted for 36 years, and many people died, and there are legacies of that. And I hope that I'm sort of getting at what you're talking about, which is the border crossings have increased a great deal. There are many new arrivals in Connecticut, partly because some of the states that they're entering aren't very friendly to immigrants, partly because folks are being bused to New York, and then they're leaving New York. They may be coming to Connecticut. The numbers that I mentioned earlier of people who are in immigration court is rising, partly because of all that, the surge at the border, and people just, as I said, leaving very difficult circumstances. So what we do at Building One Community, and it's similar for our partner groups, is we try to provide a suite of services from English language learning that's sort of tailored, especially to new arrivals, but there are a number of levels that we work at, to workforce development, to legal services, if there is a chance for asylum, if there are other ways of getting legal immigration status. So it's not a formal refugee program, but it is a very, very large number of people, and those people are part of the future of our region. Like I said in the beginning, 1 in 3 folks in Stamford were born in another country. So it's really offering programs that are tailored and they're outside the formal refugee system. I hope that's helpful.
So I will say, from the formal refugee system, since October 1st of last year, we've taken in people from Ecuador, Guatemala, Honduras, Venezuela, Colombia, and Chile, and we have a number from Haiti too. But there's quite a number that we have taken in as refugees, and I will also say that every single one of them we have enrolled in ESL and secured employment for. The only family that has yet to, from that group that I just mentioned, secure employment is the family that came in last week. But everyone else we have secured employment for from those countries, and they are actual refugees. I think that maybe the asylum seekers that our legal program would handle for removal defense or affirmative asylum applications, which is more what Dawn's legal department would do. Those are the people that it's a little bit harder. And there, because of Title 42, there's an influx at the border, which is not specifically what we're here to talk about today, and we could talk about that in an entire different panel. But it's a different process, and that's also the refugee. Yeah, they're not refugees.
So at family centers, we don't ask what their status is. They're welcome to use our services no matter what. We work closely with the churches, more so before COVID, because we had classes in the churches, actually. So we had classes at St. Benedict's over on the east side and at St. Mary's, working very closely with the Father Faya, who provided space for us to test students, to have classes on site, because if we can reduce the barriers and bring classes to where they're living in their neighborhoods, they're going to come. They're going to come. It's easier for them to get there. They'll prioritize it. Of course, now many of our classes are on Zoom, so that makes it easy, really easy for them. But with Zoom, now you have a technology barrier. You have a language barrier, and now you have a technology barrier because of the language. So we try to, bring in bilingual or multilingual people to help with the technology piece. But I have worked closely with many religious leaders because we have space in the churches, and because we know that often, whatever someone's status is, they do find refuge in a house of worship, and they generally will flock there for support and, of course, community as well. I hope that answers your question.
We have a gentleman here with a question.
This way. That way I'm not yelling. I'm going to stand up because I'm a ham. But my name is Max Cisneros, he, they pronouns. So my mom came here in the 80s here from Acapulco, Mexico in particular, Lake City, after the earthquake. And so me doing the work of immigration, I'm a humanitarian care coordinator specifically in the niche of LGBTQ immigration. And I was doing that work for a couple of years. I resigned a little bit before Title 42, but my question is this. I really love that y'all are focusing on, like y'all were focusing on education and development, because I felt like a lot of the folks I was talking to, it was like, all right, you're here, what are we gonna do now? Like, what does life look like beyond you being here, right? How many borders did you go through? How much trauma you went through? And so I love that the tenor of the conversation around education and development. So my question is this, is that the reason I left that work is because I felt like there wasn't much in terms of, the crisis is so much, right? So it's a lot to deal with, and we're going from crisis to crisis to crisis, and there's really no talk about education and development. And these are folks, the LGBTQIA community that are coming over here. When you were talking about earlier, I forget who it was, like jobs, these are folks that already were very limited in the things that they could do in their home country. We're talking about sex work. And so when they come into this country, they're put into an incredibly difficult position where they can't make money, and the only thing they know to do on how to make money puts them in a difficult position, in danger. So my question is this, where should I work next? No, like what organization, what organization can you think of in Fairfield County, in Connecticut, in the metropolitan area that is focusing on education, focusing on that 90 days, like where do we send them afterwards? I would love to be able to focus on that, especially when there's so many newly arriving folks. I would hate to think that, respect to the church and everything, but a lot of these LGBTQIA folks don't necessarily feel very comfortable in the church. A lot of the spaces around here, I'm going on, but I'll just end with this. A lot of the spaces around here, we have this double discrimination of you're brown, for lack of a better term, but you're not accepted for being queer. And then there's white LGBTQ community centers, white-centered, but you're not necessarily. So there's a lack of spaces where all your identities, all yourself is accepted and celebrated and such. So my question is, do you know of any organizations, or is it something we're gonna have to create? That's my question. So, and thank you for all the work you do, by the way.
So this actually just came up in a executive leadership meeting that I was in yesterday, and because we have a client, for lack of a better word, we have a client that is part of the LGBTQ community, and I think is going to be focused in our annual report, because that person took advantage of a lot of different programs. But it's not something, I know that we have had some, some trans students, and what was really interesting, it was not something that, I think our outreach staff knew that this person was going to class, knew that they were going to be there, and unfortunately, this was before COVID, probably 5 years ago. They didn't return after maybe 2 times, and I think I don't know enough about it. I'm certainly not, an expert, but I think I got the sense that they were not comfortable, even though they were among other folks that were ESL learners, but they were sort of traditionally gender specific. This was not something that was maybe culturally acceptable, and I think I felt very badly that we just didn't really have the capacity to kind of know what to do in that case, and after contacting, unfortunately that they never got back in touch with us, and I often think of that person. Where did they find a community and support? But I do think that there is more chatter about it. I do think there is a space that's being created. Certainly, Yelena's shaking her head. I think the library is an amazing place to try to make that kind of thing happen. It all starts at the Ferguson Library, but I think that it's important. You bring up an amazing point, because it's a community within a community. That a community that maybe isn't as seen or accepted, especially among immigrants.
And can I just say, and I know I want us to make time for another question, and I know we're running low on time. I just wanted to mention, I don't know if you've ever heard of Connecticut Students for a Dream in Hartford. The reason I bring it up, I mean, it somewhat touches on what you asked about, and also not so much, but it's a younger generation of immigrant that is genderqueer and very gender accepting, and focuses on getting education access, education equality for young immigrants. And so it's not totally there, but it's a little bit there, and it's an incredible group that I think you should learn more about, for sure. Of course, yes.
I'll let them move on, but come find me after. We have a number of programs and a number of staff specifically hired and trained to roll that out.
So, and we have one more question for the night because we're running low on time. Yes, I'm so sorry. Thank you.
Okay. My question is there, maybe particularly for the Central and South American countries, but I'm not sure, maybe in general, is there a generally accepted, reliable definition of persecution? So if someone is coming in with that as their reason, is there a comfort level? Is there something that people can feel they can rely on?
Well,
No, please go
Follow
ahead.
you.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
yeah. So the legal definition involves, persecution, well-founded fear that someone has been, will return to persecution on the basis of certain characteristics of the individual: race, nationality, religion, particular social group, or political opinion. And there are many decisions that interpret, what the law says there, but you can return to that, and that's what somebody who's applying for asylum needs to assert. Particular social group is one that's important in Stanford because we have many Guatemalans, and many Guatemalan women have been subjected to domestic abuse. There was a decision before the Trump administration that Guatemalan women subjected to domestic abuse are a particular social group because they were unable to go to the authorities. The authorities in Guatemala viewed that as a private affair. So persecution generally is by a state actor, but it can also be deemed to be sort of a state action if the government is unwilling to do something about what's going on. So that's a very quick overview, maybe not as succinct as I would like, but
There is a legal definition, and it is defined and redefined by case law. So for all of the elements of asylum, there is kind of what it's written and then the interpretation of what's written. So there's a written rule, and then case law that periodically comes out interprets that rule differently. And I would say that the interpretation of that frequently depends on what administration you're sitting in.
Definitely.
In the most PC way I
where
can
you're
say that.
geographically located as well has a lot to do with it also.
Correct.
I know that we are sort of at the end of our time, and I had hoped to ask our panelists just again about volunteer opportunities or a call to action. I know that since we're at the end of our time, maybe what I will say is that we all rely heavily on volunteers, people who have passion for helping people and have certain skills and want to volunteer their time and talents. And so if you've heard something from one of our panelists tonight that you'd like to follow up on to see if you might be able to be involved and make a real difference in these communities, we would certainly encourage you to do so. And to thank you so much for being here, and to thank our panelists for their time. And oh yes, of course, yes. One more question, of course. Okay. Of course. Would you like mine? Mine is working. Oh, I think it's attached though.
No, yeah. So the library is also heavily working with volunteers and heavily needs volunteers. So if you want come to help us, our English language program, you're always welcome. Thank you.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask if the library, who has all our email addresses, could perhaps send us your contact information for volunteer opportunities.
Yes, I will have to. I think are all of us willing to have email addresses shared with our attendees tonight? I think we're all saying yes, please. So yes, please, Jelena, if you would send our attendees tonight contact information for us, we would love that.
Yeah. Does it mean that all people here registered for the program, right? You all registered, right? Okay, definitely. I will send the emails of all our panelists, yes. Yeah, one more question. Do we have time for one more question? You were not registered?
No.
Okay.
Maybe we can have a sign in or something where people who weren't registered can leave names and email addresses. That would be great. That would be great. So
write down your email.
Sorry, I want just
no
a
card,
quick,
but did you
again,
register?
round of applause for our incredible panelists.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, all the
All so
panelists and
much.
Ellen. And that was an amazing program. Thank you so much.
Thank
We learned
you.
so
Thank you all so
much.
much for being here.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it. We hope you have a wonderful night.
Please help yourself with some refreshments. We still have something left.
Turn this off. Thank you all so much. Hi. I am, yes.
Thank you. Cultural orientation. Yep. It's like a pool.